Some crimes are treated more lightly than others. It seems quite obvious if you compare, for example, a break-in with a murder. However, it may happen that one person is hurting the other or is a threat to someone, and it's not even considered a crime until a tragedy strikes. In today's episode, we are going to talk about stalking, something that for years wasn't even considered a crime, but led many people to severe distress, illnesses, self-harm, or even death. Today we're going to hear the story of a beautiful young woman who, if she lived today, would probably be one of the most recognizable Polish people in the world. The story of Agnieszka Kotlarska. My name is Alex, and this is Poland Unveiled. Today we are going to talk about Agnieszka Kotlarska, a Polish model, but also a mom, a wife, and a very young and talented woman who died tragically in 1996 at the age of 24. She was killed by her stalker. Her husband, who, according to the killer, was supposed to be a victim in the first place, got severely wounded but survived the attack. And all that happened in the presence of their almost 3 years old at the time daughter. But before I start telling you the story, I'd like to stop for a moment to talk about stalking as a sociological phenomenon and a crime. And I mentioned the phenomenon first because for a long time, stalking wasn't even considered a crime, which made it incredibly hard to defend oneself from, and that's actually still the case up to this day, to get help from the services and not to get left off in the process. It was probably due to a misconception of what stalking actually was. Today, thankfully, we are much more aware of what it is and what it can do to a person. But about 30 years ago, it probably didn't even have its own name. It was most likely the state of California that introduced stalking to their criminal code for the first time in the United States, and maybe even in the world, and it defines stalking as follows. This is from California Criminal Code 646.9. Any person who willfully, maliciously, and repeatedly follows or willfully and maliciously harasses another person and who makes a credible threat with the intent to place that person in a reasonable fear for his or her safety or the safety of his or her immediate family is guilty of the crime of stalking, punishable by imprisonment in a county jail for not more than 1 year, or by a fine of not more than $1,000, or by both that fine and imprisonment, or by imprisonment in the state prison. It doesn't surprise me that it was California that first implemented this law to their legal system, considering the fact that it's always been home to many celebrities who are often targets for stalkers. I recently found out, and I don't live under the rock, I swear, that Jodie Foster had a stalker in the 80s after filming The Taxi Driver. But probably one of the most popular and tragic cases of stalking happened to John Lennon, who got shot dead by his stalker in December of 1980. Dangerous times, 80s. But we had to wait for a change in the legal system for at least a decade more, if we're talking about the States, and a few decades more when we're talking about Poland. Because Polish criminal code recognized stalking as something wrong and punishable in 2011. And it was after years of debates and speculations if it's even worth it. What was the logic behind that? Let me explain. So, for many lawyers, lawmakers, law school professors, and so on, there was no need to, quote-unquote, create a new crime when we already penalized behaviors which, according to the lawmakers, stalking consisted of. In other words, a potential stalker could already be convicted, based on the old criminal code, for crimes like punishable threats, a break-in, damaging someone's property, infringement of someone's privacy, which stalking might indeed consist of. But do you see the loophole here? I'm guessing you do. And stalkers saw it as well, and used it to their benefit. Because the problem with stalking is that not all of the stalker's behaviors are criminal. Sometimes they might just stand by your house or workplace for hours. They might follow you, maybe try to talk to you, or keep their distance just watching you. They might send tons of texts saying they'll love you forever. They might send you flowers, toys, and this obsession may or may not escalate. Unfortunately, most of the times, it does. But before it happens, the situation when someone is following and texting you might last for months or years. And before 2011, there was no way of punishing anyone for that. And even if the stalker started to, for example, threaten you at some point, the sentence they would get in the court of law would be ridiculously low. And this is when we optimistically assume that you managed to go all the way from reporting this behavior to the police, where they treated you seriously, started the investigation, it was successful, and then the case went to court. Good luck with that. That's why stalking had to be proven to be a bunch of behaviors, both criminal and non-criminal, combined together and happening repeatedly, which lead the victim to stop feeling safe, to stop thinking rationally, to paralyze their normal day-to-day life to the point they're afraid to leave their own house. And sometimes they might not feel safe even there. It was scientifically proven, and I will quote a research here done by Justyna Skarżyńska-Sergalia, a Polish psychologist, that stalking results in both physical and mental health disruption. It may lead to phobias, panic and anxiety attacks, insomnia, eating disorders, and troubles with building relationships in general. Not to mention that if the stalker's behaviors escalate, it might end up tragically by the victim trying or taking their own life, or the stalker injuring or killing them or the victim's family. Therefore, I'm glad that stalking eventually got recognized by Polish parliament as something much more dangerous than a few texts a day sent to you by your ex-girlfriend. However, I think that the current state of law is still far from perfect, and that it took far too many years and far too many lives for the law to be changed. Currently, the crime of stalking is defined by Polish criminal code as an insistent harassing of a person or someone close to that person, meaning emotionally close, either related or not, making this person feel unsafe or humiliated or anguished, or seriously violating this person's right to privacy. Also, the same article mentions posing as someone by using their image, personal details, or other data, but by which this person can be publicly recognized or identified in order to inflict financial or personal damage on that person. And for insistent harassing, one can be punished for 6 months up to 8 years of imprisonment. However, if the harassing results in the harassment victim trying to take their life, the punishment will be no less than 2 years and up to 15 years of prison. The prosecution of the case can only be started by the victim's motion. On the victim's motion. What happens though if stalking results in the victim's death, but not by suicide? Well, in this case, it will be treated as a murder, and stalking will just be another criminal offense along with the murder. The Polish Criminal Code does not recognize murdering the harassment victim as one of the possible results of stalking, even though it may happen, as you'll see in today's episode. Just so you know, some European countries made provision for such a situation, for example Germany, where their criminal code differentiates 2 types or levels of stalking. The basic one, so to speak, for which the stalker can be sentenced to up to 3 years in prison or a fine, and the hardcore one, when stalking results in a severe injury or death of the victim or a person close to them, and this can end up with up to 10 years in prison for the stalker. Okay, I hope you're not asleep at this point. I really wanted to talk about stalking for a bit, hence my little criminal law lecture, because I consider this crime incredibly underappreciated and kind of sneaky and alienating and therefore very, very dangerous. And today's story is only going to prove that point. So let's start by going back in time to 1972 when Halina and Antoni Kotlarski welcomed to the world their firstborn daughter, Agnieszka. They live in Wrocław, which is the capital city of the Lower Silesia region in western Poland. Sometime later, another child is born in the family, also a daughter, so Agnieszka becomes a big sister. The family of 4 lives in a block of flats. I haven't found much information on their day-to-day life or their jobs. I believe that after what happened later in 1996, They wanted to stay as private as possible, so I will try and respect that and won't dig in too deep. So years go by, Agnieszka grows up and becomes a teenager, and at that point, one could already see this one thing that would make her stand out: her beauty. A beautiful smile and a beautiful face, combined with her frail, dainty, and very feminine appearance. One could even call her petite, if not for her height, which at the age of 17 was about 1.76 meters. That makes about 5.9 feet. Her looks and interests in fashion made it absolutely obvious that this girl should try and take part in beauty pageants. Her parents were okay with this, supported the idea, especially given the fact that she was a smart girl, responsible, took school seriously, so her parents knew they could let her do it and that it won't spoil her or distract her from her responsibilities. So in 1989, when Agnieszka was 17, she started working for a modeling agency in Wrocław. She would do photo shoots, sometimes even fashion shows for shops. One of them was called Miraż. It was a bridal salon, and I'm not entirely sure how it happened, because the story varies from source to source, but it was when she worked for this bridal salon when her stalker saw her for the first time. I read that she was on a picture put in the salon's window wearing a bridal dress. Other sources say that there was a little fashion show taking place at the salon at the time, and the stalker saw her through the window, walking and presenting bridal gowns. Whichever version is true, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that Jerzy Lisiewski, because that's what the stalker's name was, he still lives, got swept off his seat immediately. It was in winter of 1990 when Agnieszka was 18 and still going to school. At the time he was 30. He was born in 1960, working as an IT guy in one of the banks in Wrocław. It wasn't the first time in Jerzy's life when he would see a woman and become pretty much instantly obsessed with her. During the trial in 1997, he told the court the story of his first love. It was a girl from his school, I think. I don't even know if they actually went out together, but it didn't work out. The girl didn't want him. So Jerzy went to her house with a knife, gave this knife to the girl's father, and asked the father if he could kill Jerzy, because the girl didn't want him, so Jerzy felt like he didn't want to live anymore. And this short story shows two things: his all-or-nothing kind of mentality and his unusual liking for knives. Unfortunately, later in his life, he will use them more often. Once to kill, the other time to severely injure someone. But I will get to that later. Also, when Jerzy was at uni, or Polytech to be exact, he fell in love with one of his fellow students. It was about 1983, so he was 23 years old. Unfortunately for Jerzy, the woman he fell in love with was married and completely uninterested in him. He didn't want to accept that and move on. He would follow this woman, sit on the staircase by this woman's flat all night long because he wanted to see her so badly. He would even tell his mother at some point that he saw this woman in one of his neighbor's window, that according to him, she would come over there to a random flat across the street only to stare at him through the window and tease him. It wasn't true, and everybody knew this, including Jerzy's parents, who, when they heard him say it, got really terrified about his mental state. And this story ended up at the police, unlike the previous one, because Jerzy got into a physical fight with this woman's husband, so the police had to intervene. At that time, the officers told Jerzy's parents that they would strongly recommend he got some sort of counseling, some help from a mental health professional, because his behavior was alarming, to say the least. But his parents didn't do anything about this, and I'm not even surprised. He was already a grown man at the time, studying at Polytech, even though still living with his parents, so maybe they felt like they didn't have the authority over him to tell him, please go see someone. Anyways, we're back to winter of 1990 when Jerzy saw Agnieszka for the first time, and from the moment he saw her, he knew he wanted her, that she was the one for him. He would be thinking about her, following her, because unfortunately for Agnieszka, she went to high school with Jerzy's younger brother, so Jerzy had many occasions to stare at her, to get on the bus with her after her school, even to follow her home, which he did for the first time a few months later in spring of 1991. And this was also the first time when he tried to talk with her. They got off the bus and he approached Agnieszka and asked, "Can a dwarf walk the princess home?" Why dwarf and princess? Jerzy was very fond of fairy tales and Disney, a grown-ass man working in the bank. His parents said that even files in his computer were named after Disney characters. Plus, probably trying to get Agnieszka's attention, he was wearing an eye-catching kind of outfit of a red jacket and a red dwarf-style beanie. So in spring of 1991, Agnieszka and Jerzy had a little chat. From what he said in a documentary that was made about this case, it wasn't a deep conversation, mostly about school, because he used to go to the same high school as Agnieszka, so he knew the teachers and some students. And when they got to her door and she said, "Well, this is me," she just went off, didn't even ask him what his name was, which he bitterly remembered. Shortly after this first meeting, Jerzy wrote a letter to Agnieszka. It was a tale, apparently about a dwarf and a princess, some sort of a love story, which Agnieszka got in her mail and, according to her father, didn't care much about and quickly forgot about it, especially because there was a lot happening in her life at that point. In 1990, Agnieszka enrolled to her very first beauty competition, Miss Wrocław, which she won straight away. Her first beauty pageant, and she turned out to be the best, or the most charming, or the prettiest, or all at once. One of the perks of winning this competition was that the girl got invited by the mayor of Wrocław to be one of the hosts for the New Year's Eve celebrations organized by the city at the main square. And this event turned out to be a breakthrough in her personal life. Jarosław Świątek, a 30-year-old lawyer, was one of the people organizing the Miss Wrocław pageant. When Agnieszka won it, and it was already known she will be co-hosting the New Year's Eve celebrations, Jarosław was asked to take care of the 18-year-old girl during that event. He wasn't too happy about it at first. In one of the very few interviews he had later in his life, he said that he didn't like Agnieszka at first, and he didn't even want her to win the pageant. He was a part of the jury with voting rights. But something changed during this New Year's Eve celebrations of 1990. They started talking, there was even the first hug, and after a while, Jarosław realized he liked this girl much more than he was willing to admit. Especially that at the time, he wasn't single, and he was 12 years older than Agnieszka. And his job, because from what I understand, he was only a lawyer by education, he didn't work as an attorney or anything like that. His job was to organize beauty competitions, and Agnieszka was taking part in them, so it didn't look good. Regardless of that though, Agnieszka and Jarek started going out together and fell in love quite quickly. Agnieszka's parents didn't approve of this relationship, and I'm sure you understand why. He was 30, she was only 18, very pretty. They might have thought that Jarosław's intentions weren't pure, so to speak. Plus, they were aware of the conflict of interest, with Agnieszka being one of the participants of the beauty pageants and Jarek being one of the people organizing them. Agnieszka wouldn't listen to her parents' advice, advising her against this relationship with Jarek. In 1991, she took part in Miss Lower Silesia competition. Like I said earlier, Wrocław is the capital city of the Lower Silesia voivodeship, so this competition was like regionals. She also won it, and as Miss Lower Silesia, she was allowed to take part in Miss Poland competition later that year. At that time, Agnieszka and Jarek were officially a couple. They went to this competition together. It took place in Sopot, which is a part of a Tri-City, right by the Baltic Sea. By the way, this is a coincidence that this is another story I'm telling you guys, and there's Tri-City mentioned again, plus the same names occur, Agnieszka and Jerzy, just like in the previous story. However, this time Agnieszka is the victim and Jerzy is the offender. Anyways, Agnieszka and Jarek went to Miss Poland competition together, and knowing that there might be some speculations about the incorruption of the voting process during the competition, because Jarosław organized this pageant as well, they both asked the jury not to vote on Agnieszka. And I want to make one thing clear here. If you go online and see pictures of Agnieszka, you'll see that she had every chance of winning this competition by herself. Like, she didn't really need Jarosław's support in order to get the crown or tiara. How do you call this thing, by the way? Is it a crown? We call it a crown in Poland. So when they both went to the jury and said that they didn't want anyone to vote for Agnieszka so that she didn't get the main miss title, that it might look better if she was the first runner-up, it wasn't because they were cheeky. They just knew that Agnieszka could win this thing because she was good at it, but they didn't want anyone to think that she got the crown because of her relationship with Jarosław. And they didn't want to hide the fact the way they were together. And how did the situation end? Well, Agnieszka won again. The jury didn't listen, still voted for her, and she won the Miss Poland competition of 1991. I'm going to link a short YouTube video from the coronation because it's both sweet and funny. You can see Agnieszka quite surprised with the outcome, accepting the crown and the main prize, which was a tractor. Yes, an actual tractor for farmers. The competition was sponsored by a firm that was called Art B. They later turned out to be quite an interesting criminal case themselves, but it's a different story. And at the time, Art B bought the entire stock of tractors from Ursus company, which was in some serious financial problems, so that's why a tractor was the main prize. However, bear in mind that, as weird as this prize might seem, tractors are quite expensive up to this day, so you don't have to necessarily use it. You can sell it and make money on it, which Agnieszka did, because she obviously didn't need a tractor. The farmer that bought this tractor from her was over the moon that he got the machine from the most beautiful Polish woman at the time, and asked Agnieszka if he could take a picture of her sitting in the tractor. She agreed. Everybody was happy, and this is how Miss Poland competition ended. So we had Miss Wrocław competition first, then regionals, Miss Lower Silesia, then Miss Poland, and subsequently Miss International. Agnieszka, as Miss Poland, was allowed to take part in Miss International competition of 1991, which that year took place in Tokyo. Before that, though, the Miss Country winners had to go to Paris for preparations, and it was incredibly exciting for Agnieszka, especially that it was her very first trip abroad, and it was to France, which she reportedly dreamt of, and then Japan, which was also on her travel wish list. Let's not forget that this is all happening only 2 years after the communism ended in Poland, and when Poland wasn't the Republic of Poland, as we are today, but the Polish Republic of People, like China now. So then traveling abroad was tough, to say the least. You couldn't just have a passport issued and go wherever you wanted. Even if you had a passport, you weren't allowed to keep it at home. It was securely kept in something like a passport office, and whenever you wanted to go abroad, you had to go to the said office and tell them you want to go and why. Where you want to go and why. And they might have allowed you to do so or not. And you had to have an invitation from someone in the country you were going to. So when in 1991, only 2 years after communism, like after it ended, a 19-year-old girl wins a national beauty pageant and then is supposed to go to another continent to take part in the Miss International competition, it was something absolutely mind-blowing and spectacular, both for her and the entire Poland. This would all sound like a dream, if not for one person that was still there, still lurking in the dark, and it was, of course, Jerzy. When Agnieszka won her Miss Poland competition, Jerzy sent her another letter. It continued the story of the dwarf and the princess. He also drew her face. He would say that her lips were the prettiest, and there was something about that because pretty much everyone who ever saw Agnieszka would say that her smile was the most beautiful thing about her. Apparently, Iza was, let's say, gifted, and he could actually draw, so I'm guessing he really made an effort when drawing the portrait of her face. Somehow, shortly after the second letter, Iza found out about Agnieszka's relationship with Jarosław and the fact that Jarosław was involved in organizing the beauty pageants that Agnieszka was part of. So at that point, Jerzy's quote-unquote love for the girl started mixing with hatred. Some awful writings started to turn up on the walls of the building where Agnieszka lived with her family. Also, right by the Miraż salon, where Jerzy saw Agnieszka for the first time and for which I think she still worked as a model at the point. Agnieszka's dad and Jarosław kept washing these writings away, but they became more and more vulgar and kept turning up. The family reported the issue to the police, saying that the girl is being constantly slandered and asked the police to do something about it, but the police would say that they're aware of the situation, they knew who was doing it without saying any names. They only said it was 2 brothers and that was it. The police didn't do anything about it. The family of Agnieszka had no idea that it was indeed Jerzy and his brother. However, Agnieszka mentioned to her mom once that the guy who sent her a letter would later keep following her to the flat when she was getting back home from school. And there was even a situation when she got scared and sped up, then started running to the door, and this guy chased after her. Agnieszka's mom managed to open the door on time and close it right before Jerzy's face, because, as you probably guessed, it was actually him. So Agnieszka suspected that the person that sent her a letter followed her and chased her, and the person responsible for the writings on the building, slandering her, could be one and the same man. The family stopped feeling safe in their own neighborhood, so at some point they decided to move flats for everyone's peace of mind. The situation only shows that the stalking escalated to the point that not only the victim but her entire family had to change their everyday life, the place they lived in, to protect themselves from the stalker. Now let's go back to this more pleasant part of the story. It's still 1991. Agnieszka is living in Paris when she was preparing for Tokyo, along with about 50 other girls from other countries. She almost didn't go to Japan because she forgot her very precious passport from the hotel, but Jarosław managed to bring it to her to the airport just in time, so Agnieszka got on the plane and landed in Tokyo sometime in October of 1991. For this trip, to represent Poland during the shows, she was given some gowns from Miraż, the bridal salon that I already mentioned earlier, her first workplace as a model, the place where Jerzy saw her for the first time, and which he would later vandalize with his hateful writings on Agnieszka once he found out she had a partner and who this partner was. Anyways, you already know, because I said that at the beginning of this episode, that Agnieszka Kotlarska won the Miss International competition of 1991 as the first Polish woman ever. She got 2 titles, actually, the Miss Photo title and Miss International. It was said that this first title, Miss Photo, was even more important than the Miss International title because it made her seen. It put her in a spotlight. And this later on gave her a chance to work as a photo and catwalk model in the United States. But before that happened, Agnieszka had to take a victory lap all over Japan, meet some people, visit some places as part of her Miss International duties. And I'm saying she had to and duties because, of course, Agnieszka was very excited with her trip and beyond happy to win the competition, but she was terribly homesick, missed her family and Jarosław a lot. And I think that being so far away from home for months, when you're in fact still a teenage girl, it couldn't have been easy. But eventually, Agnieszka returns home in glory at the beginning of 1992, straight to Jarosław's loving arms, and tries to figure out the plan for the future. In all honesty, she was expecting some calls from modeling agencies or photographers, but they made her wait for a while, a few months, I think, until she's received her first phone call and the first contracts in the United States. And it happened at the point when she felt so discouraged and clueless about the situation that she thought that her career was short-lived and over. But the phone eventually rang, and Agnieszka was invited to the States to take part in some castings, so she went to America, and Jarosław stayed in Poland, and he was terrified. Not only because his woman was going far away, again, for God knows how long, but also he knew this whole modeling/show business world inside out. He was a part of it for years, until Agnieszka asked him to stop organizing beauty pageants at some point, on which he agreed. And he knew what kind of people he can meet there. And she was so young, so beautiful. Long story short, Jarosław got kind of jealous and worried that their relationship wouldn't survive another few months or more of separation. But there was a problem. Jarosław had a passport, but he didn't have a visa. So he couldn't follow Agnieszka to the USA just like that. He made a plan, or actually 2 plans, A and B, started with plan B, which was getting the Mexican visa, so that in case he was refused the American visa, he could still try and cross the border illegally in Tijuana. However, this turned out to be unnecessary because, surprisingly to him, he got the American visa. And this story in itself is a bit unbelievable and soapy, but it actually happened, so I'm going to tell it. So, Jarosław went to the American embassy in Warsaw for his visa appointment, had to wait there for a while and noticed that there are a few desks by which the embassy workers were sitting and deciding who gets a visa and who doesn't. Most of people didn't get the visa, obviously. From what I read, only about 4% of applicants would get a visa at that time, which was early 90s. And there was this one desk with the only female consul, and Jarek saw that she would dismiss everyone. Nobody got a visa from her. So he was praying he is called to one of the male embassy workers, but sure enough, after a while, he gets to sit in front of the Madam Consul. He's sweating. He already knows he won't get the visa. Maybe he's already seeing himself struggling through the Mexican border and somehow making it further to New York, where Agnieszka was at the time. He was a young bachelor, anything but rich, and his only purpose of going to the States was to be with his girlfriend. So when he was asked about the purpose of his visit, he probably felt like, what the heck, I might as well tell the truth, because I'm probably not getting the visa anyway. So he answered to the woman sitting in front of him that he wanted to go because his beloved woman is there, and that it was up to the Madam Consul if this relationship would survive. Because if they were apart for a few months longer, Jarosław was afraid that he would lose the love of his life. So he said all this to the consul, and when he looked at her, he realized she had tears in her eyes. And then she said, right then, go to America and keep loving your Agnieszka. And guys, I know how it sounds, but I'm afraid there will be more moments like this in the story, so get used to it. A movie could easily be made based on these events, but I would gladly change the ending of it. So in 1992, both Agnieszka and Jarosław are in the United States, and this is probably the best time both in their relationship and their lives in general. Having attended many castings and hearings, because Agnieszka had to prove herself in the States, nobody cared that she had the Miss International title. She finally started to work for the biggest brands at the time, the best photographers, along with models like Carla Bruni, Linda Evangelista, Tyra Banks, Naomi Campbell, Kate Moss, the list goes on. She had a contract with Calvin Klein and Ralph Lauren. The latter simply adored her. She became his inspiration. Apparently, he even tried to hit on her at some point, but she wasn't interested. She told Ralph that she wasn't single. So Lauren said that he wanted to meet her boyfriend because he must be an extraordinary man if Agnieszka chose him over the billionaire fashion designer. So Jarosław met Ralph Lauren. There was obviously no beef between the two. They liked each other, and Ralph congratulated Jarek on getting to be with someone so special as Agnieszka was, because that girl was truly one of a kind. And I don't know if I managed to show it to you when telling this story so far, but I want you to know that Agnieszka Kotlarska wasn't a stereotypical, looking down on everyone beauty queen, as one might imagine. She was a loving, friendly, very normal and down-to-earth person, also hardworking and smart. She made many friends and connections in the States. She got to meet the most famous people in this world, singers like Madonna, Sinead O'Connor, may she rest in peace, actors like Dustin Hoffman, Mel Gibson, Mickey Rourke, who loved spending time with her, and they reportedly grew really close. But all that didn't change the fact that she was still this young, humble Polish girl who knew that her going to States was a one-in-a-lifetime shot, and she had to make the most of it. She was appreciated at work, even to the point that after a particularly successful show for Ralph Lauren, he had a plane sent to another continent so that someone could get some very rare flowers, which were then given to Agnieszka at the end of the show as a token of appreciation. Like I said though, her being around famous people, living on Manhattan, and making good money, it never went to her head. Jarosław said in one of the interviews that once she got home from work, she would put on sneakers, get groceries, cook dinner, or simply sleep when she was tired. And even though her life looked like a dream at the time, she still wanted one more thing to come true: a family of her own, a loving home she wanted to create with Jarek. In 1992, when Jarosław arrived in the USA, Agnieszka was busy with castings and shows, so Jarek didn't really have much to do, so he took care of looking for a flat for them two, in secret. He eventually found a flat in Manhattan, furnished it, and one night he told Agnieszka that he wanted them to go out for dinner that night. But they didn't go to the restaurant, they went home, their first home together, where, according to Jarek, they spent the happiest moments of their lives. There's this tradition in Poland, I'm pretty sure it's known in other countries too, that when a couple gets married and they go to their house for the very first time after the ceremony, the groom picks up the bride and brings her to the house, holding her in his arms. So this is what Jarek did when they first turned up in their flat, even though they weren't married yet. However, this got fixed later in 1993 when Agnieszka and Jarosław said yes to one another in the New York City Hall and became Mr. and Mrs. Świątek. So at that point, Agnieszka had a home, a loving husband, a flourishing career. Her dreams were coming true one after another, including the one of being a mother. Because somewhere at the beginning of 1993, Agnieszka found out that she's pregnant at the age of 21 and at the peak of her career. In her work environment, people looked at the situation skeptically. But at the same time, they knew it's her choice if she wanted to keep the baby or not. For people around Agnieszka, the timing probably didn't seem right. But for her, there was no decision to make. She wanted a family. She had a husband, a job she loved, a place to live, so she was expecting the baby with joy. She worked as usual until the 5th month of pregnancy. She was a tiny woman, wasn't showing much, plus I'm guessing, or maybe I'm wrong here, for which I apologize, that she might have been one of these lucky women for which pregnancy symptoms weren't too harsh. When it was getting close to her due date, Agnieszka decided she wanted to give birth in Poland. So she and Jarosław went back to Wrocław, and a couple of weeks before Christmas of 1993, Agnieszka gave birth to her daughter, who she and Jarosław named Patrycja. This little girl instantly became the center of Agnieszka's universe. She fell in love with her daughter and wanted to spend as much time with her as possible. But also, Agnieszka realized that her career as a model is short, and she should get back to work as soon as possible due to the fact that everybody was waiting for her in America. So a few months after her daughter was born, Agnieszka got back to work. But she went back to States alone and was missing her family terribly. She would go back to Poland as often as she could, and when this happened, she would pretty much barricade herself with her family in their house in Maślice. It's a neighborhood in Wrocław, where Agnieszka came from. The house that was either built or purchased shortly before Patrycja was born, because Agnieszka and her husband wanted to have a proper house in Poland as well, along with their flat in Manhattan and a house in New Jersey, which they bought in the meantime. During the time when Agnieszka was visiting Poland, she wouldn't work, give any interviews. She really just wanted to focus on her husband and the baby. But in the long run, the situation became exhausting and probably heartbreaking for Agnieszka, so Jarosław and baby Patrycja joined Agnieszka in the States when the baby girl was about 18 months old. So this is how 1994 and 1995 looked like for the Świątek family. Agnieszka was working as a model, Jarosław was her manager, Patrycja was growing, they were happy, enjoyed life, and from time to time, they would get back to Poland where Agnieszka could work as well. Their life in States was peaceful, especially because Jerzy, Agnieszka's stalker, didn't know where she was. They were safe. He also didn't know that Agnieszka would spend a part of the year in Poland and that she and her husband had a house in Wrocław, which was a blessing, truly. They managed to stay as private and undisturbed for a few years. I didn't find any information on whether Jerzy tried to harass Agnieszka's family when she was in the USA. I suspect that stalking calmed down for a while and that probably everybody thought that Jerzy gave up. Unfortunately, they were wrong. During this time, he didn't find himself a new victim. He didn't forget about Miss Wrocław. He lived his normal life. still with his parents, still working at the bank, where he was considered a polite and helpful guy, still fond of Disney. Also, as his brother would say, still crazy about discipline in general, and it pertained to things like personal hygiene, working out. He would run every single day for 2 hours straight. His daily schedule that always looked the same. So on the surface level, it seemed as though Jerzy got back to normal. He had no one to follow or chase after when Agnieszka was gone. He didn't know what was happening in her life. However, when his room at his parents' flat was searched by the police later on, the officers found some fashion magazines there, like Cosmo or Vogue. So there was a suspicion that Jerzy was looking for Agnieszka in pictures or interviews in these magazines. However, these were probably Polish editions he had, and even though Agnieszka would appear on covers of these magazines, it was for American or Italian editions. So Agnieszka was out of his sight and safe up until July of 1996. And this part of the story is crazy in itself. That summer, in 1996, Agnieszka was in Poland spending time with her family in Wrocław. In the second half of July, she was supposed to go to Paris and have a photo shoot there. So the plan was that she goes to States, meets crew and other models there, and then the entire group was supposed to get on a plane to Paris from JFK. And Jarosław noticed that it didn't really make sense, that she would waste a few days only on traveling when she could stay in Poland for a bit longer and fly to Paris either from Wrocław or Warsaw, which would be just like a couple of hours flight. So what was the point of her going to States, only to travel with her crew? And Agnieszka agreed and stayed in Poland. And this saved her life, because the plane she was supposed to get on in New York, along with her fellow models and a famous fashion photographer, Rico Pullman, and about 200 of other people, crashed on Long Island on the 17th of July, 1996. Nobody survived. 230 fatalities. Once the Polish newspapers found out about the crash and the fact that Agnieszka Kotlarska was supposed to be on that plane, they immediately started writing about this, with titles like "Miraculously Saved Miss Wrocław." And unfortunately, Jerzy saw the headlines, read the articles, and found out a few things. First, that Agnieszka got married. He even called one of the newspapers to confirm this information. Second, he found out that she lived partly in the States and partly in Poland, and that right now she's in Poland, in her house in Maślice, along with her husband and daughter. As he later said, this information, especially about Agnieszka being married, made him emotionally unstable. In other words, he got furious. He tried to get to her for so many years, would write her letters, draw her pictures, try to get her attention by writing vulgar things on walls when she wasn't responding to his quote-unquote love language, only for her to start dating a 30-something-year-old lawyer, then leave the States, then get married, as if him, Jerzy, was never even considered to be a part of her life, as if he was nothing for her, which was 100% true. She had never said or done anything to give him even a glimmer of hope that they would be together. But Jerzy was just a weird guy at the beginning, a guy that would follow her from school and write tales for her, but when stalking escalated, he became a problem, something she was, to say the least, extremely uncomfortable with. Then eventually, she probably got scared. Everything settled down for a while when she was in the USA and her Polish address was kept a secret. But after the plane crash, everything came back. Agnieszka couldn't feel safe anymore. Side note on the plane crash, because I'm not a fan of conspiracy theories, I was hesitant to mention this, but someone encouraged me to do it, so I listened to them. Agnieszka wasn't the only person that didn't get on that plane. From what I understand, she already had a ticket bought for this flight, probably by the modeling agency, but then she decided to go to Paris straight from Poland. However, she was still listed as a passenger. And there was also an Austrian guy that didn't get on that plane, so they were the only people that survived. However, as it was pointed out by one of the newspapers, this Austrian guy died anyway, only 2 weeks later, in a car accident. And Agnieszka was also killed, a bit over a month after the plane crash. So it was speculated that it was meant to be, that some American special services like CIA orchestrated this entire thing, but why? Please don't ask me, I have no idea. I'm only mentioning this because you can come across this information when reading about Agnieszka Kotlarska case. Anyway, Jerzy found Agnieszka's address and telephone number in the phone book, even though they were supposed to be unlisted, and Jarosław would later sue the telecommunications company for sharing their personal information. So Jerzy found out the address, the number, and he bought a knife in a hunting shop. But before he went to see her, he decided to call Agnieszka first. It was 2 weeks before her death. He dialed her number, she picked up, asked who's this, and he replied, the dwarf. She remembered instantly and said, I have a husband, a child, and absolutely no interest in seeing you or talking to you. He said to her that she destroyed his life. In what way? I don't know. Maybe he didn't really know either. He insisted on a meeting, eventually got really mad, told her that he wanted to see her so that he could, as he described it, see her ass, since she's going to show it off in Playboy anyway, so she might as well show it to him. And then he started threatening her, literally saying that he would hurt her if she wouldn't see him. Agnieszka hung up. She got really scared. Jerzy tried to call once again, but no one picked up the phone, so he left a voicemail in English, because the answering machine was set to English, probably due to Agnieszka's work being mostly in the States. This whole situation got so weird and scary that Agnieszka shared it with her best friend from high school, then her mom, and she was advised that she should go to the police with it, report it, but Agnieszka said that the police wouldn't do anything anyway, just like it happened when these writings on her flat, writings on her flat a few years before. The day before she died, Agnieszka eventually told her husband about this weird phone call she got, but she didn't make it sound too serious. Maybe she didn't want Jarosław to worry. Besides, they were supposed to go back to the USA shortly, so maybe she was hoping she would run away from her stalker. But as you guys already know, she was wrong. Because on the 27th of August in 1996, Jerzy came to Maślice. It was exactly the moment when Agnieszka, Jarosław, and their daughter were getting in the car to go and get some groceries. They were already sitting inside, Jarosław as a driver, Agnieszka on the passenger seat next to him, and almost 3 years old Patrycja in the back seat. Hot summer day, and Jerzy was dressed like a Marine. Long cargo pants, boots, long sleeve, a baseball hat, a backpack. He was prepared. Approached the car and started banging on the roof on Agnieszka's side, screaming, "Get out, I want to talk." And she said to her husband, "That might be the guy that called me." Jarosław got out of the car, and before he even managed to say anything, Jerzy asked him, "How much did you pay for her?" Jarosław got furious, started yelling at Jerzy to piss off and leave them alone, then forbid Agnieszka to leave the car and wanted to call the police. Then Jerzy jumped at him with a knife in his hand and stabbed Jarosław in his leg about a half centimeter away from the femoral artery. He knew exactly where to hit. As the investigation later showed, Jerzy was studying human body for years. Jarosław fell on the ground with his legs bleeding, and as Jerzy later said, he looked like an insect that fell on its back and couldn't get up. I couldn't believe that Agnieszka married something like this. When Agnieszka saw her husband on the ground, injured, she wanted to protect him, despite his ask not to leave the car. She wanted to help him, to save him. She ran towards Jerzy, jumped at him, he turned. He knew exactly who's in front of him and where he's hitting her with a knife. It was for once, on her chest, 3 times, and her arm, plus a cut on her wrist. When Jarosław saw his wife being stabbed, he managed to get up and hit the attacker with his cell phone. It was 90s. Cell phones were big and heavy. Then a construction worker who was nearby realized what's happening, ran to the scene and tried to stop Jerzy, but he almost got stopped himself. Jerzy was in amok. But then he suddenly calmed down. Maybe it was the hits he got in his head, maybe seeing another face there trying to stop him, whatever it was, made him stop. And then he ran away from the scene. In the meantime, the clock started ticking. Agnieszka was bleeding out. Jarosław was also severely wounded. There was a doctor that lived on the same street. It all happened so he could help. They brought Agnieszka to his house and laid her on the floor, tried to perform CPR, wanted to stop the bleeding. Then the ambulance arrived and took Agnieszka to the hospital. The sound of an ambulance will for years be something that, when little Patrycja heard, it would always make her think and ask about her mom. Thankfully, the girl didn't remember anything from that day. She was too small. The neighbors took care of her when doctors were fighting for her mom's life in the hospital and when Jarosław was getting medical help and then was taken to the police station, where shortly after, he was informed that his beloved wife, Agnieszka Kotlarska, didn't make it, that she died at the age of 24, leaving him and his baby daughter alone in this world. Like I said before, Jerzy fled from the scene. As he said later during the interrogation, he just started running aimlessly, but didn't run far, about 600 meters, a few blocks away from the scene. And then he saw a woman in front of a random house. He approached her, with a knife still in his hand, and asked if she had a phone. I'm guessing the woman was terrified. She let him into her house, especially that Jerzy said straight away, I killed the girl. I want to call the police. The homeowner took the phone, dialed the number, and handed the phone over to Jerzy. Then she realized that he gave her something in return. The knife. She took it automatically before she even understood that this knife had probably just been used to take someone's life. Jerzy spoke with the officer on the phone, said his name and what he did. When the police arrived, Jerzy was sitting calmly on the sofa and said again that he stabbed a girl to death. Then he was taken to the police station and interrogated for hours up until midnight. He told the police the entire story from the beginning. When he saw Agnieszka for the first time in 1990 in the Miraż salon and fell in love, how hard he tried to find her and get her attention, but she would dismiss him. That he really was upset when he found out that she got into a relationship with one of the beauty pageant organizers, Jarosław. That he wrote her letters, but she never responded. That he tried to get her attention in a different way, by taking his anger out on the walls of her flat in the bridal salon, writing awful things about her. That he saw her in town a few times and knew that she saw him as well, but would turn her head and get a disgusted grimace on her face. That's his words, bear in mind. And then she disappeared. He had no idea where she went. Tried looking for her in the fashion magazines, but to no avail. Then suddenly, in July of 1996, the plane crash happened. The newspaper started covering the story, and this is how Jerzy found out that Agnieszka lived in the States, but that she also had a house in Poland, in Myślice. But what's worse, that she got married. That was a shock to the system. He found her address, wanted to talk, wanted to see her, and when she dismissed him again, he decided to kill her. After all these years of chasing after her, of longing for her, to only find out she got married and humiliated him again. That was too much for him. He couldn't handle that. Does that sound to you like words spoken by a sane person? Well, it didn't to the police and the prosecutor, which is why Jerzy had to get a mental health assessment. In the meantime, when evidence was collected and Jerzy was on a psychiatric ward, the prosecution was getting ready for the future trial and Agnieszka's odyssey was completed. Jarosław had to get ready for 3 things. First, his wife's funeral. Second, his new life as a single dad of a daughter who saw her mom being killed and God knows how it would affect her life. However, as I said earlier, it turned out that the girl didn't remember anything from that day except for the sound of the ambulance sirens. And the third thing that Jarosław had to prepare for was the trial. Agnieszka's funeral took place on the 30th of August 1996 on the Grabiszyński Cemetery in Wrocław. So many people turned up that the church and then the cemetery turned out to be too small for everyone to attend. There were literally crowds. Before the mass, Jarosław got to say goodbye to his wife when the church was still empty. In one of the interviews he said she looked like a princess, like a sleeping beauty. What's symbolic, the Miraż salon gave her a dress she was buried in. The same salon in which her career started, the same that suffered from the stalker's attack, the same that sponsored her gowns for the Miss International competition, and now, for the last time, she was wearing one of their dresses, but this one she never got to take off. After the funeral, Jarosław was emotionally unable to stay in the house in Myślice, in front of which Agnieszka lost her life. He sold the house and moved out to France with his daughter and his mom. They would travel a lot, all around the world, lived in different countries on different continents. Wrocław would later said that he wanted to show his daughter the entire world to make up for the fact that she lost her mom so early. But also, he wanted to keep Patrycja safe. Up to this day, he doesn't want her to be in Poland, and you'll later see why. Getting back to the story, it's 1997, a few months after the murder. The mental health assessment for Jerzy was completed, and there was this fear that Jerzy would be found insane, which subsequently would mean that there would be no trial. In Poland, a person who is found to be mentally ill and commits a crime due to the fact they're ill cannot be prosecuted. It doesn't pertain to any sort of mental health illness, but to put that into context, a person who, for example, suffers from schizophrenia and kills someone because, let's say, a voice in their head told them to do it, and it's 100% confirmed by a psychiatrist that this person was in some sort of a manic state due to their illness, they cannot be found responsible for their own actions and will not be prosecuted. There is no trial. However, if you try and break into someone's house and then try to avoid legal repercussions by saying that you did it because you were depressed, then it won't work, even though both schizophrenia and depression are serious mental health illnesses. So you understand the difference. It has to be this kind of an illness or mental impairment or even an emotional state that doesn't allow the person to truly and fully comprehend what they're doing and what consequences it might have. So everyone was waiting impatiently for the results of the mental health assessment, and it was stated that Jerzy was not mentally ill. After that, Jerzy's lawyer filed a motion to extend the assessment and put his client in a psychiatric ward for a few more weeks. However, the judge said no, and probably for the better, because rumor had it that Jerzy planned to disappear from the hospital and join the Foreign Legion. The trial started in July of 1997, almost a year after the murder. Jerzy tried to defend himself by saying he came to Maślice to kill Jarosław, the man that took Agnieszka away from him, that she was never the target, even though something else was said during the interrogation with the police. He said that her death just happened accidentally. He tried to prove that he didn't even know he was stabbing her because he didn't actually see her, because she was kind of hanging on his back, and he tried to get her off of him and kept throwing his hand with the knife like backwards blindly, and the stabs just landed on her body. But it turned out not to be true. The witnesses said that Agnieszka was standing in front of him, plus the stabs were precisely aimed to vital organs and places on the body, places that are the most vulnerable, like heart, lungs, or liver. Later on, it also turned out that Jerzy was studying anatomy on his own from med school textbooks for a few years before the murder. He knew exactly what he was doing. He also prepared for that day, got a knife, found the address, even dressed like a Marine, and when he turned up by Agnieszka and Jarosław's car, he didn't approach the driver's side, but he saw Agnieszka and started banging on the roof on her side. He wanted her to get out of the car and wanted to talk to her. He didn't open Jarosław's door and attack him. It was Agnieszka that Jerzy had the biggest problem with. With her husband probably too, but Jerzy wasn't obsessing over Jarosław for years, so it was obvious that Agnieszka was the target. One might hope that Jerzy got a life sentence for what he did, for the murder and an attempted murder, but no. Almost 2 years after the murder, after many hearings, evaluations, experiments, appeals, and the entire legal battle between the prosecution and defense, Jerzy was sentenced to 15 years in prison. The argument for the sentence being so low was that Jerzy had a diminished capacity at the moment of the murder, that he might not have been mentally ill, so he could stand a trial. However, due to his emotional state at that moment, he didn't exactly know what he was doing. No one was happy about the sentence, as you might imagine, especially Agnieszka's family, but there was nothing else they could do. The trial was long. It was appealed twice. At some point, this road just simply ended. Agnieszka's mom was very bitter about these 15 years, especially that she felt like Jerzy knew what he was doing, that he planned it. What's interesting, when Jerzy was in custody, he would tell his cellmates what he did, bragged about it. And also, he said, probably out of pure spite, that Agnieszka's mom is a rich and elderly woman. He shared her address or phone number with the cellmates, and I don't know how Agnieszka's mom found out about it. Maybe she got a few weird phone calls, maybe even someone tried to visit her at her house, but she was really fearing for her own safety. After that, she and Agnieszka's father had to move flat to stay safe. Also, when the sentence was announced in court, Jerzy started to offend the prosecutor, calling her, let's say, a sex worker, and yelled to Jarosław that he would finish him off once he's out of jail. Jerzy would also say this thing again to his cellmates when he was serving his time, and Jarosław was informed about it by the prison guards, who wanted to warn him. In 2012, Jerzy was out of jail. Jarosław and Patrycja had to prepare for this day. As I said earlier, their location, looks, pretty much any personal information is concealed. They don't feel safe. And you would think that after so many years, since 1996, after 15 years of prison, Jerzy would eventually move on from the situation, at least mentally, that Jarosław and Patrycja have nothing to worry about anymore. So when I was reading that the father is protecting his daughter's privacy to the extent that she cannot be found on any social media, that there's generally very little information about them on the internet, that Jarosław agrees on the interviews so rarely, I thought that obviously everybody has their right to live as privately as they wish. However, is there a reason to still be on guard? And the more I was reading about this case, the more I realized that there is. 2 years after Jerzy was out of jail, someone broke into his house when he was there, but the burglar didn't know. The thief was busy piling up things he wanted to steal from the house when Jerzy saw him, but he didn't call the police. Instead, he took an almost 11-inch knife, went to the burglar, realized what's happening, and asked for mercy with his hands up. It was a tiny Romanian guy with no weapon. And what Jerzy did? He stabbed the burglar straight into his lung. The burglar survived only because he managed to get out of the house, with Jerzy chasing after him with a knife. And then, when they were both on the street, the same weird situation happened when Jerzy saw a random passerby and asked him to call the police, almost exactly like when he killed Agnieszka. The emergency services arrived just on time, and the Romanian survived. Jerzy was taken to custody and then stood trial for an attempted murder. Because, of course, there was a burglar in his house, which is bad and scary enough, but the burglar didn't try to attack him. He had no weapon. He was much smaller than Jerzy, and it wasn't like Jerzy had to defend himself. If he made his presence known to the burglar, he would probably run away. And that's it. Jerzy could also just call the police and tell them that there was a stranger in his house, but he did none of these things, and in 2014 he was facing 10 years of imprisonment. However, the story ended with 1.5 years imprisonment, and it was after the appeal because the first sentence was 3 years, but Jerzy got a parole after only 9 months of serving his time, and he was free again. I really wish I could say that we never heard about this man again, but there's one more thing that I want to tell you about. So there's this investigative journalist and a writer called Iza Michalewicz, very well known to Polish true crime lovers. Some time ago, she started a book series about the most interesting criminal cases from the biggest cities in Poland. And in 2021, she published a book called Ballady morderców, Kryminalny Wrocław. We could translate it to Killers, Ballades, Kryminalny Wrocław. This book helped me a lot when I was doing the research for this episode, and I highly recommend it. It covers each case with details, because Michalewicz is not only a great journalist and a writer, but also has access to the actual case files. Anyhow, about a year after the book was published, so in 2022, Michalewicz got a DM on her social media from a woman who was currently reading her book. I think she borrowed it from the library. And this woman wrote that in chapter number 2 about Agnieszka Kotlarska, someone added a lot of notes on the margins. Notes about the case. Very detailed notes. And the journalist was very surprised because, as I said, she had access to case files. There was no chance that she missed something important when covering this case. So she asked the woman who messaged her to take some pictures of the pages with notes. And when she got the pictures, she was staggered. The notes were made by someone with actual knowledge on the case, but it was information you could find in the case files. So Michalewicz realized that it could only be someone who lived these events, to the point that when the journalist mentioned the attack at the burglar in 2014, the author of the notes knew what the burglar got for lunch that day from Jerzy and his father because, as it turned out, they knew each other before. Probably the burglar was working with Jerzy and his father. Maybe he was helping them fix something around the house, I don't know. Plus, the notes in the book were written in Kant, a cryptolect used in jail. Some letters from words were missing, and inmates do it to make their messages shorter and to put more information in them. But the true confirmation of who wrote these notes came from 2 other people, separately, independently, and the first was Jerzy's former teacher, who knew his handwriting very well and confirmed it's his. The other person was one of the police officers who was working on Agnieszka Kotlarska's case and said that to him, it looked like it was really Jerzy who made these notes. So it looks like he still lives this case. He hasn't forgotten. He hasn't moved on. Maybe he's still upset. And I guess you now understand why Jarosław and Patrycja cannot be found on the internet, besides Jerzy is an IT guy. Why they feel still the need to stay very private, because they can't predict if one day Jerzy won't try to find them and hurt them. I can't even begin to imagine what it must feel like living like this. Maybe not in constant fear, but always having in mind that there's at least one very real, not hypothetical person who already killed someone you love the most in this world and one day might want to come and kill you. So I hope that wherever Patrycja and Jarosław are right now, they keep themselves safe and that they're as happy as they can be, given the circumstances. And I also hope that one day their fear will be over. At the beginning of this episode, I told you that, in my opinion, stalking is an incredibly underestimated crime. That even though it may lead to someone's death, I think it's not treated as seriously as it should. It's not talked about enough. It's often misunderstood. And because of that, victims and their families feel like there's no hope or no help for them. Which is probably why Jarosław and Patrycja Świątek, people who experience stalking and its consequences in the most painful way possible, decided to start the AGA Foundation. AGA is short for Agnieszka in Polish. The foundation's mission is to help stalking and violence victims get out of the situation they are in and recover from it. They will be given, first of all, peace and quiet and safety in a refuge built in an undisclosed location for security reasons. But also they will get legal advice if needed, psychological help, and they will be taught self-defense. If you want to find out more about AGA Foundation, you can find a link to their webpage in the info box below. Just so you know, you can switch from Polish to English there. It's about time for me to wrap the story up, and I know that you will understand why this episode is so long. I wanted to explain what stalking is, why it's so dangerous, and what it may lead to. And I wanted to tell you a story of a beautiful, loving, and loved young woman, a mom, a daughter, a wife, someone whose story I wish was more like a romantic comedy than drama. It does sound like a movie sometimes, and it's an awful shame that I can't change its ending. That's it for today, folks. Please let me know what you think about this case in the comment section, and I hope we'll hear each other in the next episode.